This is Katie Blackburn here. For those of you who have been listening, I'm about halfway through with reading my final edit of my work in progress, Faults of Fools. I'm going to read chapter 11 in its entirety today. But for those of you who may have read my other novels that are available as ebooks on Amazon.com by Katie Blackburn, you will meet one of my series characters in this particular chapter, Thane Henry. In Cut Flowers, he is a major character, and in Kingdoms Are Clay, he is a supporting character. In this particular book I'm reading right now, Faults of Fools, he is a minor secondary character, but he does appear in this novel, and he does help solve the problem that goes on in Faults of Fools. So, here we go with Chapter 11 of Faults of Fools by Katie Blackburn. She must work weekends, George Balchek decided as the young barmaid served him an Iron City beer. Thank you, Tamara, he grinned. She hadn't recalled the face until he sounded out her name. Then she remembered he'd tipped a buck for each trip across the floor. Good service would be her watchword for this afternoon. She upped her level of friendliness considerably and accepted the additional dollar bill. Watching her retreat to her station at the service bar, the old military term, break starch, came to George. He could almost hear the tearing sounds produced when he used to thrust his arm down that flat, stiffened sleeve of an OD green fatigue shirt. She had broken starch today with that white tuxedo shirt. An ornate barrette held back her black hair at the nape of her neck. A neat appearance. George approved of the way she presented herself to the world. He applauded the brass rail for supplying a costume appropriate for serving drinks on a Sunday afternoon. Somewhere along the line, saloon keepers seemed to get the idea that acres of pleasant-looking flesh was better for business than good service. He'd also noticed the set of wedding rings. Not that it was his place to judge another man's gift to a woman, but they didn't add up to much. Dark-haired, dark-eyed Tamara reminded him of his wife when they first married. Virginia had waited tables, nights, and weekends in Klein's for 6 years after their marriage. They needed the money, and it was her tips that paid the rent. Broad in the beam, he remembered, a lot like this woman. 2 pregnancies back-to-back had rounded out the rest of his Virginia before her 30th birthday. In the week before his visits to the brass rail, Balchek had engaged in a considerable amount of circular thinking. He toted up sums in the middle of one sleepless night, arriving at a total of $23,500 paid out over the course of 13 years. Tips. To ensure prompt service, it supposedly meant, implying that you ought to pay first and receive the good service afterwards. He paid Huffnagel one hell of a lot of money in tips. But when it came for the service for this occasion, he wasn't at all satisfied. He still wasn't sure what it is that he wanted to say today, even though it had been him that asks for the meat. Arthur showed up less than a minute late. As usual, he had the appearance of quiet authority that comes from expensive casual clothing. He kept his black leather bomber jacket on as he took a chair. Bar business was light. The young waitress immediately responded to the 2 upheld fingers, bringing 2 more beers. George's tip and her reaction were a rerun. So, my friend, how can I help you? Arthur began after a sip. His face and voice were pleasant. With ease, he adjusted himself in the chair, resting his forearms on the small tabletop, and gave George his full attention, charming and disarming. George found himself speechless for a moment. All he could think was, "How could you do this to me?" Eventually he said it. The smile faded from the councilman's face. "I've given it a lot of thought this week, Arthur. I want this job. I don't mind doing what's necessary to get it." "That means 30,000 in cash today. Look, take my advice. This isn't for you. You can't come up with that kind of money, and you can't make it up on the job. Let this one go." "You're right," the electrician admitted. "I can't put my hands on that much ready cash. But I'm willing to work out some sort of deal. Maybe even a higher percentage thing at the end. Or a partnership. I don't know. We're friends, businessmen. We can work it out." Unconsciously, George began leaning forward across the small table, his body language attempting to tighten the emotional space between the two to help him make his point. Arthur leaned back in his chair in response, met George's eyes dead on, put both hands on the tabletop before replying, "I don't want part of your business. Years ago, I owned a piece of a friend's company. His vision was different than mine. He wanted growth. I wanted cash. I had to put him out of the picture to get what I wanted. Needless to say, that was the end of our friendship. I don't mind mixing business with pleasure, but I will always put business first." Arthur rose from his chair, leaning over the back of it for a moment. "Listen closely, my friend. This deal is not for you. If you had the cash in your pocket right now, I wouldn't take it. Let it alone." The cut-out city contractor watched the city councilman's retreating back as he made his way towards the door. Her tipper had been in tune with the bar's environment. Bread and butter. The gray-haired man he met with was not. A businessman of some sort, Tamara had decided. He was the kind that drinks his lunches in obscure dimness, or does shady business in a lower-class place than he frequents for pleasure. At 25 years old, the barmaid felt she had enough rough mileage on her to spot these things. Experience had brought her to know to not expect or accept anything from any businessman who drank in a bar like this one. That kind was looking for a quick screw on a cash basis. Guys like her bucket trip tipper treated her like she was something special, not something to be used. George peeled another dollar bill from his money clip and left it on the table. She watched her departing customer's back. It was stiff with anger. Maybe he'd be back and she'd get a chance to talk with him before the other guy showed up again to spoil it. "Have a good time with the kids?" "Not bad, but it's hard to find entertaining things to do with 3 teenagers in the dead of winter that doesn't cost an arm and a leg." Thane Henry handed over his jacket to his host while wiping his feet on the inside carpet mat just as vigorously as he had on the outside nubby rubber mat. Thaddeus had not phoned his friend on Saturday afternoon because he knew it was the man's weekend with his family. Sunday afternoon's invitation to stop by for a beer after dropping the kids back with their mother had meant to be a social visit. And if the subject of the cut ropes came up, well, then... "Your sister called me," Thane mentioned as he accepted a bottle of Thaddeus's homemade beer, holding out his hand for the church key, noting 3 glasses rested on the coffee table. The detective had been one of the uninformed furniture movers a couple of weeks ago. "You'd think I'd know by now when Anna Maria was pumping me for information. I did everything but give her your phone number last night. You could have mentioned you knew all about it when I called." "She called after you did." "Honest?" He held up his palm in the whole truth and nothing but manner. Thane leveled his large, pale blue eyes on Thaddeus's face to show his sincerity. but his mouth was laughing. He leaned back in an easy chair and rested one ankle on the other knee. "Good stuff," he said after taking a pull on the filled beer glass. Like all mustachioed men, he began playing with his bristly upper lip to make sure nothing was clinging to it. "What are you concocted this time?" "Red ale," answered Taddeus, tossing the words over his shoulder and then bellowing up the attic stairs. "The cops are here. You better come down." Blindly arranging his mop and patting it in place with his fingers, and giving his sweatshirt with the Harley-Davidson logo a pull, the detective deemed himself ready to discover the Sizzic's best-kept secret. "What did Anna Maria tell you?" Taddeus wanted to know as he sat down on the Indian blanket couch. "She said that someone was trying to kill you and almost got your roommate, too." As if on cue, Eileen made her entrance wearing tight jeans, a baggy sweater, slippers, and her megawatt smile. Thane's beer glass was arrested halfway to his mouth. "Well, well," he thought as he stood to shake her outstretched hand. Introductions, beer drinking, and other social amenities took up the next few minutes before they got back to Anna Maria's call to the policeman's home. "I don't think she called the station. Your sister said she wanted the best man on the job, so she dialed direct." Eileen gently balanced her bruised bottom on the edge of the sofa seat cushion, the better to scoop salsa onto a tortilla chip, both items having been sprung from Aladdin's cave, while asking, "Why would she call the cops, well, him, if you didn't want it?" "She's made up her mind that one of my students vandalized my stuff to get back at me. Wouldn't surprise me a bit if I get to school on Monday to find out she has my kids lined up against the wall hollering, 'We have ways of making you talk.'" Thane's hand reached up to smooth the edges of his slightly too long mustache. Taddeus recognized the motion. It lit a warning light in his head. "That's not what Anna Maria told you, was it? What on earth did she say to you?" "She said a personal political enemy tried to hurt you to get at her." "That's ridiculous." "I didn't want to ask Anna Maria if she meant that Huffnagel guy. I'm under the impression he's the one behind making her look like a horse's patoot in the papers. What's the story there, anyhow?" Eileen had unabashedly listened in on Taddeus and Anna Maria. What she hadn't heard, she'd guessed at. Her face formed itself into a mask of complete ignorance regarding enemies both personal and political. A bit of overkill since she read the Post-Gazette like everybody else in Pittsburgh. Taddeus explained to both of them Anna Maria's belief that Arthur Huffnagel was responsible for the fire at his old school, and that she was out to get him driven off the council for it. It's her fight. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. I don't know this guy. He doesn't know me. Why in hell would she think to tell you something like that anyway? "Beats me." Thane threw up his empty hand to emphasize his point. "But I have to agree, your version of the story makes hers sound ridiculous. By the way, I want to hear your versions of what happened." They told him, stories and voices intermeshing in the recital. Eileen played down the extent of her bruises. Taddeus claimed he was fine. The three of them pondered the situation and their beers for a couple of seconds. "Maybe it was a one-shot deal. Malicious mischief and nothing else," Thane suggested. "There haven't been other incidents, have there?" Eileen looked expectantly at her housemate. Taddeus examined the reddish color of his beer in his glass. He produced the note that he had conveniently in his shirt pocket. "I found this on my windshield at school last Monday. It's possible, I guess, that my gear could have been tampered with at the same time. I don't see how." The detective gave the single-sentence threat the same scrutiny everybody but Sherlock Holmes would have, and asked if he could keep it. It was past 10:30 before Thane hauled himself out of the easy chair and into his puffy anorak. His thick-soled tennis shoes made him come eye to eye with Eileen in her slippers. She offered her hand to shake, and as she had when they had met a couple of hours ago. It struck a familiar chord. I have a friend who shakes hands like you. She does it coming and going, too. Now that I think of it, I think she's been to Prague. Maybe you'd like to meet her, although I don't think she speaks Czech, only German, besides English. He ignored the raising of Thaddeus's eyebrows at the mention of a female friend. Actually, German is widely used in Prague, sort of an unofficial second language. Before the war, there used to be a very big German population in the city, Eileen explained. I don't speak it, but I do understand it, and I can read it enough to get by. I've heard that before, but it always strikes me odd, he said. Not at all, she waved away the idea. Passive language skills are much easier to grasp than active ones. That's why you'll often see two people holding an active conversation in two different languages. Each speaks her best language because it's easiest to think in, but the other one understands perfectly well. It's a lazy way of doing business, but it works. Having said that, Eileen understood the public portion of the evening was over. After making final, polite goodbye, she headed out into the kitchen so that the two men could make their farewells privately. You could have given me some advance notice on your roomie, Thane grinned to his friend on the way off the porch. Anna Maria showed up here the other night unexpectedly, and Eileen answered the door in her bathrobe. I thought my sister's eyeballs were going to fall out of her head. By the way, she's my friend, and my housemate, my tenant, if you will. Not my girlfriend, not my roomie. Uh-huh, Thane said as if he was agreeing. With a final wave, Thaddeus shut the front door and called to Eileen in the kitchen. Care to split one more beer? We can finish up the munchies while the late news is on. He hit the on button, and the final chase scene of a police drama filled the television screen. Eileen brought in two clean glasses and settled herself on the opposite end of the couch. You guys know each other a long time? We both joined Sarah Hines' house when we were real young. Is that some sort of 4-H club thing with a fake Indian name? It's maybe the prototype of a boys and girls club of today. It's a long-term thing. You join when you're around 7 or 8, and you stick with it, usually until your mid-teens. Hank and I joined as midgets and stayed all the way to Midler. He used to call himself Hank Henry back then. Hated his first name. You know how kids are, he interrupted himself. We quit going there when we were, 16 or 17, when we got after-school jobs. He shifted around on the cushion to be facing her, and she'd done the same. Every August, the two of us went to summer camp outside Elwood City. That's not so far up the road, but 1,000 miles from Spring Garden Avenue, let me tell you. The cop show ended, and commercials flashed, fleeting images before their eyes. Thane was raised by his grandmother. My folks were old enough to be my grandparents, so we had a lot in common other than geography. He got drafted, and I stayed in college. Thaddeus took a sip from his glass and resumed. I guess we were really lucky when we found each other again. We bumped into one another at the mall one day. Hadn't seen each other in, 7 or 8 years. He was married then and had a couple of kids in a stroller. Once he was divorced, we spent a lot more time together. Murder and Mayhem in the Big City was broadcast into the room, followed by highly condensed reports of murder and mayhem in various parts of the world. The weatherman said it was winter and conditions would continue to be winter-like. The sportscaster made it sound like one hockey team scoring higher than the other made a cosmic difference. Eileen said goodnight right after the news team did. Thaddeus turned off the gas log fire and all the downstairs lights on his way to bed. It's been a nice day, despite the fact that just about everything on her hurt, she decided as she got ready for bed. They'd eaten breakfast together again. This time she cooked. He'd driven her back to meet the couple they saw yesterday morning, and she bought the white Honda. Kimberly hadn't called, or if she tried, it was while she was out, and Eileen had made sure she was out most of the day. Ducking your daughter ought to make you feel bad, she told herself. Only ducking Kimberly didn't make her feel all that bad at all. Well, maybe just a teensy bit. The afternoon had been spent in the dark with Mel Gibson. A pleasant way as any to while away a couple of hours. Of course, Mel Gibson was on the movie screen and she was in the seat at the theater, but looking at his body at least took her mind off of Thaddeus in spandex. Erotic fantasies were beginning to be a problem. Abruptly, Eileen turned on her bed lamp and reached for a novel to read. We cannot have this sort of thing going on, she chastised herself. We just can't.